Welcome to Climate Talk Uganda. My name is Josephine Karunji, and this is the accessible, acronym-free podcast about all things climate change. And we're picking up from our last conversation where our guest then hinted at the complexity of land ownership, especially as it concerns women, and how the ownership then determines how the land is used. In this episode, I'm trying to understand what women's ownership of land has to do with climate change, if at all. And our guest in the studio is Kayanja of the Uganda Community-Based Association for Women and Children Welfare. Welcome, Karo, and thank you for coming through.
Thank you.
Karo, tell me a bit about yourself. Who is Kayanja?
Kayanja serves as a senior program officer, Women's Land and Property Rights at UCOBAC. Like you mentioned, UCOBAC is Uganda Community-Based Association for Women and Children Welfare. A gender activist. Anything concerning rights for men and women, the equality and the equity bit of it, I'm in for it. I am a mother. I am a wife. I love my life. I really love my life. That's what I can say for sure. And I love to make sure that everyone around me is happy.
What does happiness look like?
Happiness to me means that first of all, you're able to get your necessities in life. So I'm a person who always helps when I can, in terms of making sure that you can have food, your children are okay. I always feel like, for example, the children, they need to be pampered, they need to be loved, they need to be cared for. And I know that when children are happy, their mothers are happy, everyone around them is happy. But also, happiness to me means having that person that you can talk to and it helps you like figure out your emotions, your thoughts around things, because it helps you think right. Sometimes someone just needs someone to talk to. Yeah.
I noticed you mentioned children at the beginning of all of this, and every time you talk about children, your eyes sort of tear a little bit. What draws you to the work that you do with the Uganda Community-Based Association for Women and Children Welfare?
I think it's in our name, Women and Children. I know for sure that as a mother, as a wife, I love my husband, I would say for sure. But our son is at the center of everything. So we actually wake up every day to think of how we can be the best of ourselves for him. So I know that, so for me, working with that organization helps me really achieve my passion. The passion is that children should be well, women should be well, for families to thrive.
When you were talking about the children, I was remembering that we're often warned that these children we focus on as parents, we focus so heavily on them, and then one day they're going to wake up and go, and then it will be just the two of us partners who have been living our lives for these children who have now found their wings and left us.
Yeah, but you can always make memories in that whole experience of raising children. Yeah, you don't leave behind your partner. I think that partnership actually grows when you're raising children. Yeah.
Tell me about the association, the Uganda Community-Based Association for Women and Children Welfare. What do you do there?
So we are an NGO, just like so many other NGOs in Uganda. Our business, as I said earlier, it's in our name. So we work to promote the rights and welfare of women and children. And this we do under our 4 core program areas. One of them is Women's Land and Property Rights, the program area that I lead. We work with orphans and vulnerable children. So it's very passionate for us to work with children and make sure they are able to achieve their goals in life. So we work with children and support them in education, health, and everything. But we also have another core program, which is sexual and reproductive health rights, where we work with mothers, young girls, the refugees, for them to be able to access different sexual and reproductive health services like menstrual hygiene, family planning services. Like I said, women need to be in charge of their lives and everything for them to be able to take care of their homes. And then that fourth is climate change, resilience and adaptation. And so everything at the center of everything we do is the woman and the child. And we don't, and that doesn't mean that we don't really take care of the men, because we know that the women and children that we are actually talking about live with the men. So we work with the men for them to be able to support the women and the children that actually stay with. And at the end of the day, the whole family benefits. Yes.
How far back, or how old were you when you got engaged in this work?
Personally, me?
Yes.
I think this is my 7th year with the association, but the association will be making 35 years next year.
So 7 years ago when you joined the association, what shocked you about women's land rights?
The level at which people actually don't understand their rights shocked me. Because coming from an education background, you go to school, and sometimes you actually take things for granted up to when you work with communities. And then you know that that there is a level of illiteracy that we actually do not even talk about. We talk about people going to class and everything. There are people who no longer need to go to class, but need literacy about the things that they actually have, or the life that they're actually living. And surprising, sometimes we think that it's only the women who are illiterate about their rights, even the men.
When you say illiteracy about their rights, give me an example.
For example, certain women, for example, do not actually think that they have a right to inheritance, for example, in their father's estate. They have been nurtured in societies that have made them believe that they are girls, and so land is for the men. And I'll give you an example. We have a neighbor at home. When their dad passed away, their dad gave each of the boys an acre. And then he gave the girls, I think the girls are like 3, he gave them 2 acres. And they were okay. It's because they have been nurtured to believe that we are girls. We don't need this. But also, there are women in communities who have actually, for example, married. They are legally married, but they don't know that they are legally married. And their rights are being violated, but they don't actually know that they are legally married. For example, so many women are married, church marriage. Their husbands are in different marriages, and actually go ahead and do traditional marriages on top of the church marriages. And then all these people are comfortable not knowing one's right is being violated, their land is being divided for other women and everything. Like, there is a lot of the confusion down there that stems from people not being able to actually know their rights and being able to stand up for their rights.
So now that I think I have a sense of you and what you're passionate about, I'm going to get into the conversation. And when we do get into it, we'll get into how women's land rights, their knowledge of it or lack of knowledge of their rights when it comes to land comes into play. This is a climate change podcast.
Yeah.
So when you wake up in the morning, what's your biggest concern about climate change as an individual?
As an individual, and coming from a rural background, and also being a person who does a bit of farming, I have a story.
What does a bit mean?
I don't wake up every day to go to the garden. So I try my level best to see that we have like enough food, but that's not my like everyday business of like going to the...
When you say a bit
of farming, there are people who are actually doing farming as a business.
What farming are you doing that we can describe as a bit?
A bit. Probably I used the wrong word, but a bit of it is that I only grow, like I have a small plot of land, grow my banana there, pick a food for just home consumption. There are people who are actually doing farming as their business. That's where they get their school fees. That is where they actually depend on their farm. That's not
if
me.
I said a bit, I'm talking about having mint and lemongrass on the balcony.
That's a bit.
Yes.
I think I'm in the bigger category.
Yes, you
now.
are in the bigger category.
But my biggest fear about climate change is not being able to have food at home. And I see that happen very soon. Because, like I said, I've grown up in a family. I come from Mitiana. That's where I come from. We have grown up growing food for our home. Of course, yes, food for consumption at home. So every holiday you could come, and it was always a must that you leave a plantation, either it's cassava or sweet potato for the next holiday. And I can see a decline in production of late. So my biggest concern about climate change is not having food, because I don't want to wake up as a mother and my home doesn't have food. You know how that feels?
I won't say that I know how it feels, but I've seen it. Yeah. You are going to tell me a story in relation to what this biggest concern is for you.
Yeah. Because, I mean, the harvest, everything. I do farming. You stop me from saying a bit. I think I do farming. Because I grow maize, I grow banana, my parents do that, my neighbors do that, our whole community does that. And I can tell you for sure that climate change is real.
What does real mean?
If someone is to harvest 5 sacks of maize from, for example, an acre of land, that same acre of land, you're still growing the maize there, you can no longer harvest that same amount of production harvest that you actually used to get years back. But we also see the irregular rainfall, patterns of rainfall. Like you can tell if you're someone who has really been paying attention, you can tell that even the seasons are no longer certain as they were. So people in the village, communities are working on a guess. We just crammed that during these months we should be planting. So we prepare a plant. We actually do not know. The uncertainty bit of it is also another challenge. And we can tell, you can tell the rains come for 1 month. The season that used to be for like 3 months, it's now for 1 month. So irregular. You cannot even tell, you can't predict anymore. But communities still work on a guess that between Feb and May, we should be growing food.
What makes it, for people who are listening and thinking, what makes us say that's climate change? It could be just changing, the weather has not come as we thought it would come, but also going back to your previous example about what you were getting on this size of land, you're not able to get the same produce. What makes it climate change and not just poor farming practices or a different generation of people that maybe don't know how to utilize the land like their forefathers knew how to?
Yeah, but what makes us think that it's climate change is also how our communities now look like. I don't want to say it's a different generation, yes. Also, it could be a generation that has come with different demands when it comes to environment. And so because the human practices that are now leading to this, you go to a community where it used to be like a forest. There is no forest anymore, right? So you cannot say that is not climate change because you're not going to receive rain. You see people adamantly like sweeping away swamps and just pouring their land, soil, and just building their...
So isn't that our practices?
Yeah, those are human practices that are actually leading to climate change, yes.
All right. So you've spoken to me how, as an individual, the issue of climate change affects you. Somebody who works with women and children, how does that affect you? How does the thought of climate change or the realization of it affect you?
So in our organization, I'll tell you a story. We do a lot of land demarcation, registration and demarcation. And I remember one day going to the community and really mobilizing communities to just accept to map their land because their land will be secure. And then some old lady said, okay, after now mapping our land, what next? Because now you see, we have floods here, we have everything. And for me, that's my biggest fear, that people may come to a time when they just give away their land because they feel like they are no longer like gaining from it. They are no longer getting food. We see floods, we see drought, this whole issue of not being able to have food and everything in your community. And people may just like really feel like land is not something that they should actually hold on to. Is it actually solving their problems? That could be the question, because these rural communities really depend on their land. If it's no longer solving their problems, what's the reason as to why they are holding on to this land?
And then you start having conversations about communities moving on to other sources of income.
Yeah, which sources of income?
So I've been in, I think it was in Panyimur, where this smallholder farmer, had her piece of land and she was growing food for her family. And because of the flooding, she moved on from the land and just took up fishing as the option to take care of her family.
But she will still need land to have housing, and even when she went to farming, she still need that piece of land, that sense of security for her to have a home and be able to raise her family there.
And that then takes me to a question that I was going to ask you, that it's a seemingly obvious question, and sometimes we think we know the obvious things, but we don't. Why is land important?
So when in the perspective of climate change, the conversation that we are having today, being able to undertake climate change action requires a sense of security. Understand? For example, if someone says, let's preserve our trees, our forests and everything, where I come from, you can't plant, for example, indigenous trees on a piece of land that you don't own. So telling communities to undertake climate change action requires them to own that land, to feel safe on that land, to actually feel like they're investing in a piece of land.
It's personal.
It's a personal thing. Yeah. Yes, that is why land is that important. I feel like there is no action that is going to actually be undertaken that doesn't really need land. And when you talk about communities that depend on farming, on agriculture and everything, it becomes a personal thing. You're telling me to plant trees, and we want to remind communities that when we are talking about trees, we want to encourage communities to think of indigenous trees. Indigenous trees that they take years, but indigenous in nature, they actually serve a purpose. There is a purpose that comes to being indigenous. So you cannot plant an indigenous tree on a piece of land where you actually know that anytime soon you're going to be evicted, right? You cannot talk about soil preservation, biodiversity, everything where you know this land doesn't actually belong to me. So it's a personal thing.
Carol, we've had this conversation with previous people that were in this studio about how climate change affects women differently from how it affects men. But I'm always keen to hear other people's perspectives. So I'll ask you the same question. Does climate change affect women differently from how it affects men?
Yes.
How?
The question is, what are the effects of climate change?
And what I would on women, and what I'd love the most is if you could give me tangible examples of communities you've been in.
Yeah. The question, I would start from what are the effects of climate change? The effects of climate change, we spoke about one in our earlier conversation. For example, people not being able to harvest enough food. So also climate change comes with land degradation. Climate change comes with displacement of people. Climate change in the extreme events also comes with death. So there are a lot of pressures to the environment, to the livelihood of people that comes along with climate change in our community. Now, why do we say that climate change affects women and men differently? Women are already they're already vulnerable with so many other things. For example, they're already in a challenge of not being able to own, access, and have control over land, right? Now, when we talk about women in this sense, we are also talking about people who feed homes. Traditionally, women feed homes. Now, if I'm not able to have food in my home, it's a problem. Whose problem is that, really? It's always a mother's problem. Somehow, it's always a mother's problem. You don't want to wake up one day and you don't have food for your children. In that challenge, men can always find alternatives. The women will be stuck with their children. And I don't know whether you've witnessed this, but even when you see like on news in these communities that have suffered floods and everything, you see that the women are holding on to their children. Like there is that personal nurturing bit of it, the care burden that comes along with also effects of climate change. So the care burden worsens. Traditionally, women, of recent, women have stepped into the role of actually doing the actual providing, for example, education, health, and everything. So, and the women we are actually talking about really depend on their farms and everything. So if they are not able to have enough produce, they are not able to have enough income, then they are not able to provide even the other basic services for their children. And I'll tell you for sure, the men always have alternatives. The women are stuck with their children. And these women are already vulnerable. They're already vulnerable. Some of them, we're actually talking about displacement in terms of floods. They don't even have where to go. But they have children. Because even when we think of going to our relatives, you go with your children. You as a mother, you can't leave your children behind. So the care burden that actually comes along with the climate change is what actually makes the effects very worse for women than for men.
And so that we make this very clear, specific to land, so that we center the conversation. Women, land, and climate change. What is the distinct relationship there?
So the distinct relationship is that when you talk women generally, research shows that over 80% of women, 75 to 80% of women provide farm labor. They're engaged in agriculture. However, where they are actually growing food, they don't own that piece of land. Actually, in our country here, statistics shows that about 25% of women own land in their own right. So when we talk about the effects of climate change, we're already talking about a group that doesn't have control over even the key productive resources for mitigation, adaptation, and resilience when it comes to climate change. Because when we go with all our innovation, talking about, for example, afforestation, talking about improved farming mechanisms and everything, the question is on whose piece of land?
The most recent person who interviewed actually said that you know why they call women abachala.
Bachala. Yeah. So the question is on whose piece of land? It's kind of where am I investing? Will I even, because we have seen women who actually put in their effort, grow food on a piece of land, and their husbands just sell it. Like your husband just sells it. Now, for example, that climate change action actually requires investment. Sometimes you need to put in resources, right? To actually, for example, the improved farming mechanisms that we're actually talking about, they need a bit of investment. On whose piece of land are you actually investing?
Have you, and I'm sure you have, but I'd love an example of when you've seen all of this very practically. A woman you've met in a community and this is her reality.
It may not be like really an example I've interfaced with, but I was invited to speak to a group of women farmers by an organization. And this organization supports these women farmers to grow maize. And they grow maize and then this organization buys it from them, kind of provides the market. There is already market for maize. But then they had challenges with the men because in their initial partnership with the women, they actually didn't think they needed the men. But these women are actually growing maize on land that legally belongs to their husbands, and the husbands are not in the picture. And so there was a challenge of the men selling the maize and everything. And I want to imagine that there are so many communities out there where a woman goes, buys seedlings or buys seeds, plants them, and then their husbands just sell them. And for purposes of climate change action and initiatives that people are undertaking, already we are talking about a deprived group of people. So they are struggling to get these resources. And then they are investing them on a piece of land that actually doesn't belong to them. And they have fears. Do you think they will actually take the action? They need to get a bit of security, a sense of security that at the end of the day, it will all pay off.
Tell me about this sense of security.
The sense of security looks like how, if you're accessing this piece of land, how is that right of access protected? If, for example, you're married to this man, how is your ownership of this piece of land look like? And it's a combination of so many other actions, and that's where the registration bit of it comes in. How do the land documents really look like? Can you even make a decision on what to grow on this piece of land? Because you might be there encouraging women to actually, for example, plant trees. And you just wake up one day and your husband says, I've rented the land.
If I am part of an organization, or if I'm starting an organization that's going into communities and convincing women, smallholder farmers, and saying, you need to plant trees, climate change is here, and so on, what would you advise me to do first?
What I would advise you to do first is, of course, that is the first thing is community mobilization. We need to get communities at the center of this thing, but addressing the norms, the barriers that could actually hinder these processes is very important. Much of the things that we women are suffering from perceptions, norms, and practices in communities, on how communities really perceive women and how communities perceive men. So I would advise any organization to not address surface issues, but invest in addressing the root causes of these surface issues. The root causes are the norms, addressing the norms, and this calls for working with men as allies, as change agents, as supporters for rights for women. That is very important. And then I would advise you to invest in educating these communities, but also take it out from the community. There is a lot to do with the policies and the environment in which these community actions really depend on.
What role do you see customary laws and structures playing in helping to provide solutions to some of the things that you've been speaking about?
So first of all, when we talk about customary laws and structures, we are talking about things that communities hold on to passionately. And we deal with this in our programs for land rights, and we know for sure that when you go to communities, they are customs, they are elders, our chiefs. So these are things that are really pertinent, people are very passionate about in their communities. And so it gives us a starting point for all this. how can we actually use, for example, the customary structures to champion some of our interventions? Because, for example, here in Uganda, when the Katikiro said Emwanyi Terimba, you see, it's like
Coffee
a wave.
became,
Coffee is the in thing. So everyone plants coffee because the Katikiro said Emwanyi Tekolachi Terimba. So there is that, there is a starting point. There is what we can leverage on, what people actually believe in. You know that people actually believe in their elders, chiefs, even more than the minister. People will listen to the Katikiro more than the minister, trust me. People will listen to their elder there more than the minister, because the elder is closer to them, speaks their same language, feels like they understand the community. So we can leverage on that. The respect, the trust that people have in championing some of our interventions. I can imagine if it's a drive, for example, led by a kingdom out there, for example, Toro, and it's their leader championing, for example, planting trees. Trust me, people will plant trees because their culture leader said so. And then in terms, and it's very, for customary laws, I know for sure that different kingdoms, different cultures have those customary laws that governed how they do things in their community. Can we look into those and know what's progressive in there that we can leverage on in terms of championing climate change actions? For example, you could find a community that had a law of when you do this, you plant a tree. When you do this, this is how we manage our farms in the community. This is how we preserve our food. This is how we have prayers. You know that people have those traditional ceremonies that they do for rain and everything. Can we leverage on the progressive things to actually help us mitigate some of these challenges?
What do we do about the urban setting? And that's assuming that it's different from the rural setting.
Yeah, there are a bit of, there are really unique things to the urban setting, because even when we start from the issue of land, tenure, security in the urban setting, it's totally different from that in the rural settings. Oftentimes when we talk about urban settings, we talk about prime areas. Prime areas in every district, they're expensive. So oftentimes the women choose to go to what we call the low-end areas in the urban settings, which then leads them into informal settlements. Now, and I know for sure that Uganda has been declared a planning, every area is a planning area, and we have a physical development plan for the country and everything now. The failure to implement that plan are the effects of climate change that we are seeing in urban settings. If informal settlements are not managed well, you know how informal settlements look like. These are like slums with so many people, informal houses and everything. The trenches are not working well. The waste is not managed well. Then we have floods. Now, we are talking about a deprived category of people. These people live from hand to mouth. In case of a flood, their livelihoods are disrupted and their lives are just disrupted. And so I think it's an issue of implementation of the policies, implementation of the plans that we have for urban setting, but also thinking about and we have had this conversation of smart cities for a while, and Uganda being a unique country when it comes to tenure security with our tenure regimes, I think that discussion is more into working with the landlords for the urban centers, because, for example, in Kampala here, most of the informal settlements are on Buganda land. So we need, those partnerships need to really come into play for these areas to be managed well, and then to also just manage the effects of climate change that come along with informal settlements.
What particular challenges have you seen for women, especially in refugee settlements and in host communities, Women who've been displaced, what have you seen them face in terms of adapting to climate change?
So
As regard,
yeah, and we work in a refugee settlement in Lamu called Palabek. One of the things about refugees is that you don't have an option on where to stay. So you're forced to stay in a camp. These camps are actually congested camps. So the congestion alone is a problem. But also these refugees are allocated small plots of land. And so in a struggle to actually find more for themselves, there is always a conflict with the host community, but also there is pressure on the environment in that community, pressure on for firewood, pressure on the forest. Somehow things will be depleted because people are struggling for resources. Then that pressure on the resources in that community alone is a problem to the host communities themselves, but also to the refugees themselves. They can't cope because they already they don't have resources. They don't have income. Their income is really not stable. They actually don't have any income. So in a struggle to survive, there is always that pressure to the community. You see that forests are destroyed. Certain times the camp keeps expanding to actually those areas that were always preserved for the community, for the government to be able to accommodate refugees. And we want to say that that can actually cause violence in such a community, because the host communities keep fighting with the refugees because we said people are struggling for resources. Yeah.
You kept using the word pressure, so I wanted you to just clarify something for me. Every time people say climate change related pressures, what are we talking about?
Climate related pressures. I want to believe it's things that are really affected due to climate change. I don't know whether I'm not making it even more complex. But for example, if there is climate change in Kampala here, if there is a flood, people who used to stay in this piece of, in this community will then shift to a nearby community. And then there is pressure in that place, like water is no longer enough, security is not there, everything is not enough anymore. So there is pressure on that, in that community that wasn't there. And that same, I can even bring it from the angle of refugees. What used to be for people in that community, there is pressure in that community because you've brought another group of people, so many people, and then they're actually, firewood is not enough. Everything is no longer enough because a person was displaced from their own country to another country.
Carol, if I'm hearing you right, when women have access to secure land, when they're able to secure land and will then see positive outcomes for families, how do the programs at your organization on women's land and property rights, how do they go about tackling climate change impacts?
So for us in our organization, we have actually mainstreamed, we have mainstreamed climate change because we got to realize, even when we have a special program for climate change, we got to realize that there is a relationship between climate change and everything we do, and everything we do as an organization. For example, land rights, you cannot talk about land and you don't talk about climate change. But people also struggle to see the nexus between climate change and sexual and reproductive health rights.
Somebody actually asked me that question recently and said, we're being told that to get budgeting for our programs under sexual reproductive health rights, we have to talk about climate change. And we don't see
that nexus. We talked about women not being able to earn due to not being able to produce enough. You're not being able to earn. So you have to make priorities. Would you go for your injection or you treat your sick child? So that's how you weigh your priorities as a woman really changes, because you know when you don't have enough money, even it happens to everyone. If you don't have enough money, you have to prioritize your expenditures, but also for children and schools and everything. So first, mainstreaming and knowing that climate change may affect each and every sector you're actually working in. So that's how we go about this whole.
Do you ever work with people or get into contact with people for whom climate change is? What are you talking about? Climate change is in your head?
No. I feel like we have come to a level where communities, people started to accept the effects of climate change, because every district has their own story to tell when it comes to climate change. I usually want to give people, there are districts that have been earmarked as districts of plenty. You know, when we talk about plenty, for example, the Central region has it for a while. We all believe there is enough food in the Central region. And me growing up in such communities, working in such communities, I know that even those people, they have now started to accept and feel the pressures of climate change. And of recent, I was having a conversation with someone about this heat in the night, like how you literally sleep. It rained, like today it has rained, but you feel the heat in the night. And I want to believe that's climate change. Everyone will have to somehow feel the effect of climate change. And in the same spirit, everyone has to take action.
Thank you so much, Carol. It's been a pleasure having you.
Pleasure too. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.